Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and alcohol coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, alcohol, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance.
Good morning, everyone. And it is the morning, so much the morning that I overslept, which has literally not happened to me since I was 17. But I am here and I am recording a podcast with my good friend, Ellie Crowe in the UK. Hi, Ellie.
Hello, Wendy. And I love the fact that you slept in and that you are acting like your teenage son.
I am acting like my teenage son. I know. Yeah, this will be a story for all time. I'm so glad I made it, though. I really have been looking forward to this. In my defense, it is very early in the morning where I am, but I set my alarm for the PM instead of the AM, which will never work in your favor if you're trying to get up at the AM, which is what happened to me. Okay, so Ellie, we have known each other now for a couple of years, and we met through the certification program with This Naked Mind. And you are a certified coach, new senior coach. Congratulations. Practicing in Cambridge, right?
Yes, Cambridge, yes. UK. Yeah.
In England. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So I want to start. I have so many things to talk to you about because you have such an interesting practice. And I think there's a lot of overlap in terms of what you and I do, but there are also lots of areas that you kind of have a real interest and specialty in that are outside my wheelhouse that I think will be really interesting for people who are, listening to the podcast. So can you start by telling your story, maybe just around, of course, anyone who gets certified with This Naked Mind has an alcohol story. So, or most of us do, I guess. So can you maybe start there because your story is a little different than my story. And, you're quite a bit younger than I am, I think, too. How old are you now?
So I'm 41 now.
41. So yeah, you're quite a bit younger. Your kids are a lot younger. And so your story sounds a little different than mine. So why don't you start and just tell people how you got to a place where you thought, I should get certified as a This Naked Mind coach. Where did it all start?
It always makes sense to me to start in the middle somewhere because I just classified myself as a massive social drinker up until the point that I had kids. And it was having the kids bit that threw me for a loop. So initially, I've got 3 children. They're quite close together. Pearl is the eldest. So she's 8 and a bit. And when I fell pregnant with her, it was just this most wondrous experience. And the whole not drinking for 9 months, no problemo at all. All I was interested in was this pregnancy and this new baby and the new stage of life that we're embarking on. So I'd gone from being a social drinker to a non-drinker for the first time in my life, apart from childhood. But it was fine. I was just totally focused on this pregnancy. And then when I had her, I kind of got the shock of, oh, I'm now breastfeeding. And whilst I'd banked on not drinking for 9 months, I had no idea how long she was going to feed for. It sounds really silly. I just had no idea. And so I was like, oh shit, I kind of thought I'd be, able to enjoy a glass of wine or what have you now. And then I was caught up in this breastfeeding situation. So I did go through the whole process of trying to time feeds and pumping milk and then having to pump milk whilst she was taken from the bottle, although she didn't really take to that. But it was all, this whole endeavor was because I felt like I was missing out. So when we'd have friends around for dinner or in the summer and we'd be serving drinks, if I wasn't drinking, I would really feel like I was missing out. So whilst I could stop for periods of time, I did feel that there was something there, like there was some level of deprivation. So I then fall pregnant with my son. So there's just under 2 years between the two of them. And the pregnancy with him was very, very similar. But the thing that was really interesting postnatally was I felt really different. And I don't know whether it's boy hormones. I've got a suspicion that it is. But I really struggled postnatally in a way that I hadn't with my first. And of course, throw into that, I've now got 2 under 2. and we don't have any social support here. So everything is on myself and my husband. We don't ever get any time off. It's, you know, in the last 8-9 years, we've probably been out a handful of times. So there's a big load there. I run my own business as well as my coaching business. So I was trying to run that business with these two little beings around. And so it was difficult and it was complicated and stressful. But the hormonal thing, I couldn't put my finger on what was going on, but there was just something not right. And it was characterized by extreme rage and volatility. So it felt at the time, I think I got so overtaken by it, I couldn't distinguish a cycle to it. It was just a lot of volatility. And when I was in a difficult patch, it felt just like it would pull me under. The rage was like, it was like having an out-of-body experience. It was really, really bizarre. And so despite the fact that I was still breastfeeding, alcohol for me became the means of coping at the end of the day. It was like the release valve at the end of the day, the way to slow down, stop the racing mind, ease into, you know, some kind of relaxation. So I thought, but then I'd wake up the next morning feeling like crap and then having to get through another day. And so it's just this like constant cycle of just bloody difficulty trying to enjoy the kids whilst they're young, because everyone's saying, oh, they grow up so fast. And I'm thinking,
yes,
I can barely get through the fucking day.
That's the worst thing to say to people. And sometimes I catch myself saying it now because my kids are like 18 now. And I cringe at myself, and I usually back off of it and apologize because it's just not what you want to hear. It's hard.
It's well intended. I remember sitting at a birthday party once, a kid's birthday party, and this older mum, I mean, so she was in her 70s and she's looking wistfully at all the kids, and she said, oh, you know, I know the days are long, but the years are really, really fast. And I remember, like, I think I just burst into tears. And that was often like the way that I'd go to baby groups and things, and I would just feel so strung out and so depleted. I had no means of self-care other than a little bit of yoga and wine, and that was it. And I think because of the rage element, and we'll come back to this a bit later on, but I think because of the anger, the intense anger that I felt, and intense resentment and the rage that kind of would take over me, I felt a lot of shame around it. And so I think for a long time, I struggled just by myself. I didn't talk to anybody about it. And it kept me stuck. It really did. In the end, I remember just feeling so, like, I wouldn't say that I was depressed all the time, but I felt so low with it and I had nowhere to go. I ended up going to the GP, to the doctor, and I sat in front of her and I told her everything, and she wanted to put me on antidepressants. And I had this thing about, oh, no, I can't take antidepressants. It's almost like I failed. If I take antidepressants, I failed. And it was all to do with a story. I unfortunately lost my father when I was 20. And at the time I was prescribed some antidepressants and they really didn't work for me. I needed to grieve. I didn't need to take antidepressants. And so it just hadn't worked out well. And so I think I was carrying some of that story over. So I had this resistance. No, it's not antidepressants I need. Off I go. And I probably lasted another month. And then I was even like, I thought that I'd already hit rock bottom. And then it was just so much worse. I could barely function. So I went back to the GP. And I remember sitting with her that day. It was like I'd admitted defeat. And in some ways that was good, because I was ready to surrender to, just give me whatever. I don't care anymore. But it was the sitting looking at my two kids, they were tiny, playing at my feet. And I remember just looking at them and thinking, like, they deserve so much better than this. And then my next thought was, they'd be better off without me. And when you start to tell yourself things like it's horrific, just so sad, because of course they need me more than anything. But I felt so down on myself, like I'd let let it get to this point where I was just completely pulled under by it. So that was a really horrible place to be. But there was something in that moment of, as I say, surrender. I immediately felt lighter. And so I had this solution called, well, I'm going to take these antidepressants and hopefully that's going to allow me to get my head above water. And she also advised that I went to see a cognitive behavioral therapist. So that in itself was great. The other thing that was interesting in this conversation was that she said to me, when she's prescribing the antidepressant, she said, how much do you drink, or do you drink? And I said, yes. And I was in such a daze, I forgot to lie about how much I drink. So I told her that, like, the extent of what I was drinking. And it was probably at this point I was drinking 1 or 2 bottles of wine a night. Not every night, but most nights, if not every night. And when I said it out loud, and she kind of looked horrified, and she said, you need to cut down. And I thought, oh, right, yeah. And I felt, I kind of left her office feeling a bit silly. But then I thought, well, how do you do that then?
Right.
So if that's your self-care, how do you cut it down then? I just had no idea. So off I go. The antidepressants were marvelous. I had a low dose, and it was just enough that I could get my head above water. I could breathe. I felt leveled out, and that allowed me to then engage with this therapist. And I had a fabulous therapist. He was amazing. The first time that I met him, I was talking to him about, I'm just a really anxious person, and I've suffered with anxiety all my life. And this first hour that I spent with him, he helped me to completely reframe my thinking. And so in that first hour, I saw the power of the cognitive work, of changing our thinking, of working on our belief systems. And in that first session, my lifelong anxiety it hadn't gone completely, but I just had this totally new perspective on it. It's like, oh shit, it's not out there that's the problem. It's in here that's the problem. I have more control over this than I ever thought possible. So that was a really empowering place to be. And I worked with him for a few weeks on generalized anxiety disorder. And the difference in my life, like immediately, because everything that he was working with me on, I could put it into practice immediately. So I just went from like stride to stride, feeling better and better. It was paid for by my medical insurance, and we'd kind of dealt with this anxiety. And he said, well, you've still got some sessions left. Is there anything else you'd like to work on? I said, oh, well, I don't know whether you can help me with this, but I've got really bad arachnophobia. He said, yeah, I can help you with that. So that was the next thing I worked on. And again, it was just this you see, what I'd done with my spider phobia for years was I'd avoided it. So I'd gone hypnotherapy and putting conkers in the corners of my room, like any way to not expose myself to spiders, to be away from them, lots of safety behaviors employed. Right. And what I learned working with him is all of that, all of those safety behaviors, all of those mechanisms just reinforce the issue. It's, you have to have gradual exposure. That's, so effectively I had to hold a spider and it was baby steps to get there. But the difference, like in how it makes you feel, I can do this, the confidence boost, it was just the most phenomenal experience. And so for me, I had been terrified of spiders for years, to the point that I would, like, if there was one in the house and I was alone, I would be outside the house on the street looking for somebody to come into my house, a complete stranger, to come and remove the spider. It blighted my life to then this change of like, well, I can tolerate them. So again, just showing me like the power of the mind. And so by the summer, so I've been with him for about 4 or 5 months. I was then ready to come off the antidepressants. I didn't feel like I needed them anymore. My yoga practice was becoming much deeper. I did a gut reset as well. And by the end of the summer, I felt the best that I'd felt in a long time.
Can I interrupt for 1 sec? Just curious, what was happening with the alcohol through all of this? Yeah. Had you made any changes with alcohol or no? You might be getting
That's what I was going to say. So no, you're fine. So because of those things, my consumption had reduced.
Okay.
Almost naturally, without much focus from me.
Yeah.
So when I was going out to more yoga classes, less opportunity to drink and so on. And I just felt better. So whilst in all likelihood, I would still been using it as a means of stress release or a reward, not to the extent that I was. So I felt much better. And then I fell pregnant with my third one. And so then, everything's all up in the bloody air again. And she, that pregnancy actually was, it was tricky because it was the first pregnancy where I really missed drinking and I felt really deprived. That same thing in social situations, I would be grumbling because everybody else is having a great time and I'm not. And she was born in one of the hot summers that we had. She was born at home and early hours of the morning, later in the morning. So it's about 11 o'clock in the morning. I've been up like a good 24 hours with labor and what have you. And I'm in my bed with my newborn baby. And my neighbour came in from next door to see me and to meet the baby. And as she walked through into my bedroom, she laughed. I thought, what is she laughing at? And she was laughing because on my bedside table, I had a glass of of my favourite white wine chilled on the, 11 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, what the hell is she laughing at? Like, this is totally acceptable. I've just given birth. I've been up all night. But again, it's just one of those things that makes you think like, oh, maybe this isn't so, so I don't know. I don't like using the word normal, but anyhow. So again, I'm back into this cycle of, trying to kind of manage the breastfeeding with the drinking. And I was still practicing yoga and all of these things. And the thing that was different with my littlest one, Noah, was that the others, you go through those periods of sleep deprivation. With Noah, there was no end to it. She turned 3 in August, and that's when she first started sleeping through the night. So up until that point, she was up at least 6 times a night, and she would want to breastfeed every single night. And so you're having the depletion from the breast milk, but then also the interrupted sleep. Like it is absolute torture to always have broken sleep. Yeah. And then any sleep that I was getting was poor quality sleep because I was drinking. So I wouldn't have been getting any REM sleep. So I'm then back in this cycle of depletion, waking up feeling terrible and having had no decent rest through the night, then having to get through the day, nobody to hand the kids off to, trying to run my business and a lot of stress related to that. And just, I was just utterly exhausted all the time. Looking back, I don't know how I managed. I really don't. And then this hormonal thing seemed to come back. Now, when I'd seen the doctor the first time, when she prescribed the antidepressants, she diagnosed me with something called PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Yep. So a very extreme form of PMS, and anybody that's suffered with it will know exactly what it's like, but it can leave people feeling suicidal, homicidal. It's quite serious. This time, I wasn't sure whether it was the same thing. The great thing was that I was more aware of it. And what it felt like was once or twice a month, I would have this period where I would feel this same volatility, this same extreme rage. And it would be very it was like having an out-of-body experience. It'd be really hard to kind of stop myself in the moment. And then, of course, there's all the shame and the guilt afterwards of, how you've reacted to certain things. And so I went back to the doctor and I talked to her about it. And I said, look, I don't want to take antidepressants again because for 95% of the time, I'm great. It's just this once or twice a month. I don't get it. And she said, well, you could take an antidepressant for the luteal phase of your cycle. And I said, I don't really want to do that either. She then, I think, started ordering blood tests, but because I was breastfeeding, it was going to be difficult to interpret what was going on, but it was the first hint of, so I would have been what I'd been probably about 39 at the time, it was the first hint of, oh, well, maybe there's something else going on here. There's definitely something hormonal going on.
Yeah.
So I'm then back in this, moderation cycle of trying to drink and then drink less at the same time. So I don't want to stop drinking because I'll feel deprived and I'll miss out. And I'm using it for, whilst I've got yoga and what have you, it was still a means of self-care. But I was starting to get really worried about the amount that I was drinking and my health and being there for my kids and being the best version of myself for my kids. And so I then got into all of the rule making, I'll just drink on a weekend. And then I'd manage 3 days and then feel like an absolute champ. So I'd reward myself with a drink on Thursday. And so the weekends kind of stretch out a bit longer. And then, of course, when something stressful, bad happened, I'd let myself off the hook. Oh, screw it. It's all right. We'll start again next week. And so this was just a cycle all the time. I had a trip to Vegas, my first time I've been away from the kids. And I let loose, like it was me and a bunch of my friends that, we've known each other since our 20s. And we all are in our 40s or 40s and early 50s. I think some of us are headed that way. And we're in Vegas and we are just drinking like we're in our 20s. Now, I had a wonderful time that I can remember, but there was something about it. Like, I just thought like, oh my God, this isn't me anymore. Like, I blacked out when I was there. I'm thinking like, God, I'm like, I'm nearly 40 and I've got 3 young kids and like, this just doesn't feel right anymore. So I had kind of the makings of like there was something undercurrent, there was something that was happening for me, and then it comes in the form of divine intervention. On my Facebook feed, I see this post from This Naked Mind, and it was a PDF called The 6 Vital Things That You Need to Know About Moderation According to Science. And the 2 things that stood out about it were moderation, because that's what I'm trying to do, and the science bit, because I'm the kind of person, I like to know how things work and why they work. I'm a questioner. And so I was intrigued and I start reading this paper, and Annie, of course, is very great in the way that she writes, and she made it extremely accessible by saying, look, your brain's going to try and tell you that this isn't true, but you might just want to suspend belief. And so what I read in this paper was essentially how alcohol works with the brain and body. And it was like this big slap around the face. I thought like, shit, how did we not all know this? How are we not all talking about this? Because here I am, the primary reason I'm drinking is for stress release and relaxation. And in a few pages, what I've realized is that actually alcohol doesn't ease stress at all. It causes it and it exacerbates it. And we end up with elevated levels of stress hormones in the body. So there I am like, holy shit, like this doesn't make any sense anymore. And it was this really weird experience of, I had been like, imagine, I couldn't get a few days together without feeling deprived. I'd gone from being that fixated on drinking to having no desire to drink at all. It was weird. It was just really weird. So I'm in this like funny little spot and I'm thinking, well, what do you do to socialize then? And do your friends want to socialize with you if you don't drink? So I was kind of in this weird liminal space, but the thought of not having to drink anymore, the possibility that it opened, like I was just so excited and so curious. And I thought, I'm just going to see what happens here. And so I just stopped drinking. And I didn't tell anybody because I thought if I make some big announcement to my husband, then I'll fall on my ass, like I usually do. And so I just quietly stopped. And it was a revelation. And about a week later, because I'm now on Annie's email list, I get the invitation to the live alcohol experiment. So this was the December of 2019. And the alcohol experiment was starting on the 1st of January. And my first thought was, it's $47. And I wasn't going to spend $47 on myself. Like, oh no, because I would always come last, spend money on everybody else, do everything for everybody else. And then I thought, hang on a minute, if I don't drink in January, I'm going to save like 400 quid or something. I was drinking expensive wine and a lot of it. I'm going to save a shed load of money. So I decided to invest in myself, and it's only $47, but that was a big thing. It's a big deal that I chose to do that. And the thing is, because I'd invested $47, I made this commitment to myself, like, I'm going to show up to every live coaching session. I'm going to watch every video, probably twice. I'm going to do all of the journaling exercises. So I grew up in Yorkshire, and Yorkshire folk are known for being tight with their money. And so I wanted to make sure that I wrang every last drop out of it. And so the lead up to the alcohol experiment, there's the opportunity to do some pre-work, and part of the pre-work is mindful drinking. Now, I'd never drank mindfully before, ever. So I chose to drink. It was on Christmas Eve. So normally I would have had the Christmas carols on and champagne and wrapping the presents. And I decided to mindfully drink on Christmas Eve. And I couldn't believe it. I realized, so I had two other beliefs. I like the taste. I like the way it makes me feel. And I proved myself wrong with both of those beliefs. Just, that evening drinking, it was like, as I started to drink and I really paid attention to how it felt in the body, it was like this closing in. And I didn't like the feeling at all. Whereas I always thought that I liked that giddiness, that tipsiness. And it was horrible. It was so horrible that it took away from the whole experience. I love Christmas. It took away from the whole experience of Christmas Eve. And it was like getting on a really shit merry-go-round that then you can't get off, because once you've started, like you're in it. Yeah. So that I was like, I am done. I'm never drinking again. And so that Christmas was my first Christmas, bar pregnancy and childhood. It's the first Christmas that I'd ever had without drinking. And it was just fucking amazing. Like being entirely present with the kids, not falling asleep in the afternoon because I've had too many mimosas. It was wonderful. So that continues all the way up to January the 1st. And then here I am in the alcohol experiment, and I am just like, I'm solid, and I am like here for it all. And I've met this community of wonderful people. And so then all of the potential shame around drinking, well, it all just dissipates because you're with thousands of other people that are trying to do the same thing that you're doing. And I got about halfway through, I felt amazing. All the time that I was stressed, the thing that I wanted most in my life was peace. And I had this peace for the first time ever. My anxiety had gone. I had this mental clarity, the joy that I used to feel as a kid. I thought that had gone. Like that as an adult, you didn't have access to that anymore. And then here it all is. And so it had such a profound effect on me. And here I am, like, a couple of weeks alcohol free. And I thought, like, I've got to help other women. There are just so many women exactly like me that will be in that cycle, that moderation cycle, trying to get some kind of release at the end of the day. And they don't know. They just don't know. They're like I was. So I wasn't sure how I was going to do it, but I was looking up at these coaches thinking, oh God, I want to do something like that. And then at the end of the month, that was the first time that Annie opened up this Naked Mind Institute to train coaches online. And so that's what I signed up for, even though I had this like, well, who the hell are you to be going and signing up to be a coach? You've stopped drinking for a couple of weeks, and now, like, who the hell do you think you are? But there was just this part of me that knew, like, and I hadn't been in touch with that part of me for a long time. And so a bit like I was so wrong about how alcohol had served me or not served me for so many years, I thought, well, I'm willing to be wrong about this voice that doesn't feel authentic, and I'm going to listen to the other one. And so I signed up, and it was terrifying, but it was just the most wonderful experience. And even if I hadn't have decided to coach at the end of it, just for the personal development, it was just such a phenomenal experience. And of course, that's where we met. And I remember being on the calls, and I'm looking up to Wendy like, oh God, like just completely intimidated. So it was just so wonderful to get to know you. And you have been such an amazing support and a mentor and a friend. And, you know, when you started doing the podcast, I was like that, oh, look at her doing it. Oh, yes, brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And here I am. I'm on your podcast. It's amazing.
I know. And you have your own podcast, which is incredibly successful. So you're doing everything. And I just love it. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ellie. First of all, I haven't heard all of those details before. So that was just amazing for me to hear. But it also, there were so many things as you were talking, I thought, okay, let's go back to that. So here's one thing I was thinking, which is kind of outside the box and probably wrong, but as you were talking about the arachnophobia and the idea of exposure therapy, really with the spiders, I was thinking, I feel like that's kind of a little bit, I mean, it's going to sound wrong when I say it, but I feel like This Naked Mind is a little bit of exposure therapy in that what we're doing, we're not telling you to drink per se, but we are saying, depending on where you are in your journey, we are sometimes saying, look, at the beginning of this, it's actually really valuable to do a little bit of exposure therapy in that you're actually paying attention and being mindful around the drinking itself, instead of doing what so many programs do, which is basically help you put it in a corner with it. You said a conker. Is that like a chestnut?
Yes. Yeah.
So it should put with a chestnut in front, like just like put it in a corner, put something on top of it, and then just white knuckle your way through 30 days and ignore it. And like, okay, I'm not going to think about alcohol. I'm going to take it all away. I'm not going to be with people who are drinking. I'm going to do everything I can to set myself up for quote unquote success in this experiment by actually doing the opposite of exposure therapy, right? Doing what you had been doing for so long with spiders, which of course hadn't been working. And so, obviously This Naked Mind's approach it's different from other approaches. It's one approach. We, on this podcast and just generally, I'm very much a fan of any road that gets you to freedom from alcohol, where it has in fact become small and irrelevant in your life. But I do think that this is such an interesting and different way of looking at your relationship with alcohol, which is to actually look at it, like really examine it. So what do you think about that? Am I crazy that that's like sort of some kind of form of exposure therapy?
No, you're bang on. And it's part of the reason that I mention it, because it, like that part of my story, it would be so easy to just gloss over that, because personally for me, it was really impactful. But on the face of it, it's like, well, what's the relevance? That exactly is the relevance.
Yeah.
We need to look at things a different way, because if all you do is try to avoid something, like you say, it doesn't go anywhere. It's still over there in the corner. It's still going to come and bite you on the ass at some point in time. Yeah. And the other part to this is, so we need to look at our relationship with alcohol, and we have different layers of belief, right? So we have the layer around the substance, the layer around society. So when I'm thinking, oh, will my friends want to socialize with me? That's that level. And then this core around self, which, is usually down to self-worth. And we have to look at this stuff that's at the core. Yeah. Because if all we do is address our beliefs at the level of substance and society, then we'll replace alcohol with something else, sugar, social media, unhealthy relationships. Yeah. It's looking at the stuff in the core, and that can be really confronting. And, I had a bunch of stuff that came up after I went alcohol free, and it was a real mixed bag. There was some stuff around being professionally discontent, and I wasn't sure what my purpose was in life. And then I had some childhood trauma, and then there was the delayed grief from the death of my father. So like big things, but it's in the process of looking at those things and exposing myself to those things that you can then heal. And when you move the other side of these things, just like the feeling with spiders, it's like, I'm really strong. And you build this strength and this resilience, and then it's compelling. Like you want to grow more, and you want to push yourself out of your comfort zone and find the next challenge. And so this, it's part of the reason that Sam, my co-host, part of the reason we put the podcast together is because the way that we kind of see it is it's not really about alcohol at all. It's about all of this other stuff and how expansive life can become just by removing, this one thing. But there are so many myths around it, and so many people have so much story and so much cultural stuff that it can be a real barrier to even, like, I would have never considered going alcohol free. And like when I first cut it out, it's like, what on earth are my friends going to think of me? Because I was like the big drinker.
Yeah.
It's like that doesn't make any sense that Ellie doesn't drink anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole reason for our podcast is to kind of get all of that, like dispel all those myths, get rid of the nonsense, and then illuminate what an alcohol-free life is really like.
Yeah. And the power in that moment where the Christmas Eve, when you're wrapping the presents and you're thinking, let me just pay attention to how I actually feel about this thing and how this thing is actually making me feel is, I mean, it's invaluable. And that's the moment that changes everything for you. And that is, it's like, let me take all the chestnuts out of the corners and actually just sit here with the spiders.
Yeah.
And I just love that analogy and the fact that you talked about those two experiences, because this is the part that I'm always trying to figure out how to articulate in a way that's actually going to be persuasive for a woman who's listening to this podcast to actually do it different. And that is, you have to leave some room in your heart for the impossible, which is that this actually might go completely differently than you think, that you actually might not know all of the things that you think you know as just like absolute black and white truths. And that is really the value of this experiment mindset that we talk about all the time, just leaning into curiosity and self-compassion and just assuming you don't know. I always use like the example of a chemist in a lab who's like putting this compound with this thing, and they're just going to see what happens on the other end. Like they don't know, they might have a sort of an educated guess, but most of the time, you're doing an experiment like that. At least I was, when I think back to like grade 11 chemistry or whatever, I had no idea how it was going to turn out. And I was just open and kind of excited about what the outcome might be and what I might learn from it. And that's what we need when we're approaching alcohol if we want to get truly free from it. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think that's been incredibly helpful. The other thing you talked about, Ellie, that I want to go back to is the rage piece, because I think this, that is something that was such a strong symptom of mine in perimenopause. So I didn't have a lot of obvious symptoms in perimenopause. I had a lot when I went into full menopause, then it became very, very challenging for me with obviously hormonally related symptoms. But in perimenopause, I mean, I'll never really know, because for the first, I would say like at least 5 years of perimenopause, I was drinking quite a bit. So who knows whether I just attributed the crappy sleep and, sweats every once in a while and all of that to alcohol, which it could very well have been. But I know that after I removed alcohol, for sure, I really didn't, everything kind of leveled out and I felt pretty good until that month when I just never got my period again. But I think back to the one thing that was happening all the time. And for years, I did not attribute this in any way to hormones. I just assumed it was a personal failing on my part, which is really hard. And that's why I like to talk about it, is that I felt that guilt and shame that you feel. I felt that out of body, experience where I was literally felt like I was watching myself spin out of control, and I could not stop myself. And it was even shameful in the moment it was happening. And I would still keep doing it because I just felt it was physical lack of control. I physically could not stop it once it started. And it was erratic. And, if I was to actually go back and look at it, if I had records, I bet it was very much connected to the timing in my cycle, but I wasn't paying attention to that. But that was horrible for me and absolutely contributed to the drinking. For sure, I would have, if there'd been a day where that had happened, the first thing I would have done was reach for the bottle to try to just forget about how awfully I had behaved and how many people in my family I was going to have to apologize to. I mean, my kids, I always say they were equal parts terrified and entertained by my rage. Like, and that would just enrage me more. They would in the moment I'd see their faces like, oh my gosh, mom's losing it. And then 10 minutes later, they'd be in another room laughing about it,
Yeah.
behind my back, which just made me more mad. But that whole experience for you, I know that you and I have had lots of conversations about hormones. And I know you started listening to my podcast really, and got interested in it because of Sarah, the conversations that Sarah and I, is Dr. Sarah Bailey, for anyone who hasn't heard any of my conversations with her around hormones. There's so many back episodes that you can go listen to on that. But Sarah and I were talking about just the common signs and some of the things that happen to women as our hormones start to fluctuate during perimenopause. And I just wondered with the, I know that you had a diagnosis of PMDD, and that of course is a hormonally related thing. And I wonder what your experience has been since then with it. So how has that rage, for me, it did go away, surprise, surprise, when I went into full menopause. And as I got closer to full menopause, actually it dissipated. And after I gave up alcohol, I think it dissipated. But I think what was happening is that probably when it was at its peak was the period in my hormonal history where my hormones were still wildly, fluctuating, just kind of all over the place, which is really what the perimenopause period is characterized by. And then towards the end of perimenopause, in the beginning, right before you go into full menopause, your hormones are sort of coming down and then they just level out. And so I think it makes sense that was happening for me in that period of wild fluctuation, but it did level out for me on its own. And I'm just wondering if you notice anything with that and what your experience since then has been with that.
Yeah, it's this is the other thing that I love to talk about, because it's for all of us women, it's, we're going to be affected at some point by this it's going to different experience for everybody. But I had no idea about the perimenopause, and as you say, I got really interested in listening to you and to Sarah Bailey, and I kind of had this thing like, oh, that's ahead of me, but it's a way off yet. And actually the monthly volatility that I was feeling, like I've now got to the bottom of all of it. And it's closely tied together. But whenever I spoke to a medical provider, they kind of told me, oh, you're too young. And so when I first removed alcohol, so I was 39. And the thing that was great about removing alcohol was that I was able to understand what my baseline was. Because prior to that, the symptoms are just like, well, what's this attributed to? It could be bloody anything. Yeah. So I was able to, and I worked with Sarah personally for a little while, and I was able to just understand the kind of what the underlying situation was for me personally. And it was confusing, but it was so good to have somebody like Sarah to be able to talk to who's so experienced. So I dabbled a little bit with supplements and had some success there. But ultimately I was still, no matter, and of course my self-care habits and rituals and things, like I've learned so much since going alcohol free, and had this, new web of things holding me, doing all of this business with supplements and Chinese herbs and acupuncture, but I was still suffering with this volatility, not to the extent that I was before. So clearly it was exacerbated by drinking and alcohol, but there was still something there. And I began to wonder, particularly through working with my acupuncturist, whether I was going through perimenopause, like in inverted commas, early. I don't know whether it's early or not. But so when I would speak to the doctors, they would kind of dismiss it. I had one GP who listened to me, and she was kind of on it. She was like, look, we need to investigate this because there's implications for your bones and your heart and your cognitive function. So I then started going down this path of like trying to figure out what was going on down the medical route. And all the while still doing the old apology tour every now and again, which you can relate to. Yeah. And where I got to was, because my periods were like all over the place, like would just disappear for months on end. Where I got to was, it was probably the autumn of last year. I was convinced, like, I need estrogen. Like I really, and progesterone, I need it. And my blood tests some of them were kind of a bit inconclusive, and I was just caught in, we have this wonderful system here, the NHS, the National Health Service, but it can be slow. And I'd been trying to see a private doctor to facilitate things. And in the end, I got on the phone to a GP and I just said, look, I'm not leaving this phone call until you prescribe me some estrogen and some progesterone. And he sounded like a little young fella. Nobody to know what to do with me. He said, well, look, I'm happy to prescribe for you and we'll monitor you closely, but I want to refer you to the menopause clinic. And I said, you can go for your life, but give me the hormone therapy. And so he went to prescribe me a patch. And fortunately, I'd done my homework, and so I could ask him for what I needed. And so I wanted the estrogen gel and I wanted the micronized progesterone. So kind of educating the doctor around, what more modern hormone therapy is like. So I started off on that, and I tell you what, like immediately I felt relief. It was just incredible. And of course, the progesterone, taking that at night helps you to sleep. So within like a month, I was like a new woman. I felt amazing. And my acupuncturist is saying to me, you want to stay on this for life. Like, you don't ever come off it. It's amazing. And so a lot of my symptoms are gone. I was having terrible headaches and things as well. So all of that just settled down. The thing that I was left with that was really frustrating was exhaustion, fatigue, lack of focus. And so I went investigating that and thought, maybe that's down to not enough testosterone. So I go back to the doctor, ask for some testosterone. Oh, we're not allowed to prescribe it, right? So which is mad. So when you head towards menopause, you lose 3 hormones. Yeah, we're not going to replace the third one for you. We'll just replace 2 of them. It makes no fucking sense whatsoever. So she says, well, you're going to have to find it privately, be monitored on it privately, and then we'll prescribe it for you. So I go down that route, get my hands on it. A month later, I'm like blown away by how different I feel with this small amount of testosterone. And then I get my letter through from the hospital. I'd forgotten about it. Remember the referral to the menopause clinic? So I then have to go through the NHS route. So I go and tell him, it's great. I figured it all out. I've got my estrogen, I've got my progesterone, I've even got my testosterone. And he got a bit uppity because he wanted to be in control of it and he wanted to prescribe. And I was kind of ordered to come off the privately gained testosterone so he could measure my levels. And it was like, I just felt crestfallen because I felt like normal and I was functioning normally for the first time in ages. And then here I've got to take it out. It's like, and this bloody thing, this tube of testosterone was in like my bathroom cupboard every day. I'd look at it thinking, because I knew it would help me if I could take it. And it's like torture. And it took so this is about the February, I've only just got my NHS prescription of testosterone about 3 weeks ago. Okay. So I'm only just getting to the point where I'm going to start to feel the benefit.
And are you still taking the estrogen and progesterone then?
Yes. Yes. And
I want to just stop for one moment because this is a thing that we aren't doing a good enough job of on this podcast. And I just had a guest on who her episode will probably come up before yours, where we talked exactly about this. So hormones can be a great route for many women. And I'm also on hormone replacement therapy. Ellie's on hormone replacement therapy. It's working very well for me. It's working really well for Ellie, which is fantastic. It is not a route for all women. And I just want to be really clear about that. For many women, it's not available as an avenue. And we talk about it all the time, like it's the savior, which it is for many of us, but unfortunately for many women, it's not even an option that they can consider as a result of their medical histories. And so I just want to be clear about that. There are lots of other avenues that you can explore. We really encourage you. We're not advocating hormone therapy here, but what we are saying is go and talk to your GP and be your best advocate here. And Sarah did that before she got, Ellie did that before she got on the the hormone therapy, and that she was working with different doctors and health practitioners to try to figure out what she could do for herself. So I just wanted to stop and say that, Ellie, and I know that's not in any way to discount or take away from your story. I'm so wonderful that you have found relief from this. But because Sarah and I have both ended up using hormones, we tend to spend a lot of time talking about hormones, and we're not in any way suggesting that everybody needs to go on hormones, and definitely everybody can't go on hormones, which I just wanted to clear that up. Sorry.
Yeah. There is one thing though that I would add, Wendy, because I didn't know that, and I wish that I'd known this. It's a fabulous book by a lady called Maisie Hill called Perimenopause Power, and she talks about this beautifully. But I had no idea that when you're considering, so if you are able to have hormones, and if you want to have hormones, the earlier that you have them, the better. So you'll reap more benefit from them. So particularly with regard to your cognitive function. So for somebody like me that is in theory going through this early, if I'd have waited it out and then kind of taken it later on, then not only would I be experiencing all of the symptoms, but there's all the unknown, all the unseen costs to your cognitive function, your heart and your bones. Yeah. So if I think the one thing that Sarah taught me about really early on is track your symptoms, because tests are a snapshot in time. You really want to be getting clear about how you feel and what your symptoms are, because then you've got something to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that is something I don't know that we've talked about lately on the podcast, but that is absolutely where Sarah and I come back to at the very, every single time, is the place to start is to get it, a journal and a calendar, and start tracking what is happening with you every day of the month. And I think if I'd been able to do that around that menopause rage, I would have seen an obvious pattern. That's my gut on that tells me that I would have seen an obvious pattern in terms of the timing of that. Okay. So the other little piece that I wanted to make sure we talked about today, which is something that you are continually exploring. And I think it's so great. I almost live vicariously through you. I haven't got up the courage to do any of it yet, but I know that, big piece of your own personal path, and in terms of personal growth and development, and also now part of what you talk about a lot on your podcast and with your clients, is around, the ways that we can support our bodies and kind of create this best life for ourselves that are physical. I guess that's the best way to put it. So, we talk a lot as coaches, we talk a lot about shifting our mindset and how we're in control of the story, and we can change the ending, and we can, if something's not serving us, we can go in and examine it, and like the power of experiment mode and staying curious in your life and all of that, which is all amazing. But there's this whole other side to supporting your own physical and mental health and well-being that is really rooted in practices that help to regulate the nervous system. And you've become really interested in that. And so I wanted to talk about that. So I've probably done a terrible job of explaining what that is. Do you want to start by correcting me and letting everybody know what it is that I'm talking about here, and what those practices look like for you?
Yeah, of course. And not at all. You've done a great job of explaining it. There's kind of this misconception that the brain's in control of everything. And it's actually only about 20% of the messages are what we would call top down. So from the brain down to the body. So as you rightly say, you can change the way that you feel by changing the way that you think, which is wonderful. But that's 20% of the story. The other 80% is what we call bottom up. And so this is where we need to engage in practices that what we call somatic or bodily practices that can help us change our feeling state by tapping into the nervous system, nourishing the nervous system. And there's within my coaching practice, what I do with individuals is work on two areas. There's kind of the baseline stuff. So we all need a baseline of habits that these are kind of the things that are going to serve you well over the longer term. So it's a bit of delayed gratification. So things like meditation or some kind of exercise moving the body, you may feel the benefit initially and in the short term, but it's the consistent practice over the long term that you kind of get the halo effect from it. So we need to have a baseline suite of habits that are going to be individual to us, that make us feel good over the long term. And then,
can I just interrupt for 1 second? Because I talk a lot about switches and seeds on this podcast. These are seeds. So these are seed type tools. These are the tools that you plant them like a seed, and you have to nurture them and go back to them and work them through the seasons. And eventually they start to bear fruit, but they are unlikely to bear massive amounts of fruit for you right in the beginning. Okay. Sorry, Ellie.
Yeah, that's it. And so then the other element is the in the moment tools, which, as you say, the switches, the things that can have an impact in the moment. Yeah. So if we're feeling dysregulated, like the simplest thing to access is the breath. Like, you can change the way that you feel. You can change your state in an instant with the breath. So, and there are so many different ideas. There are things like, going and putting your feet in the earth outside and grounding yourself. Cold water, I'm a massive fan of cold water. And again, that can change your state. Not just that. Part of the reason I'm a massive cold water fan is, if you think back to what I was talking about, like, as far as stress goes, so we're all going to feel the impact of stress. Like, there's no avoiding stress. We might like to take action to minimize stress in our lives, but stress itself isn't a bad thing. It's a case of like needing to be able to regulate. And so cold water therapy is something that I engage in. So every single day I'll have a cold shower, and I can't tell you that it ever feels like, it always feels cold, right? Like, you can get used to it in some respect, but that first, like, going in, there's always going to be a mental barrier because it's bloody cold. But by deliberately going into the cold and deliberately exposing yourself to stress, you give yourself the opportunity to increase your bandwidth. So but by doing this repeatedly, you are building your stress tolerance effectively. And in the moment, you have to learn to regulate. So you go into the cold shower, the first thing that happens is, now you can either start breathing high up in your chest and panicking, in which case it's going to feel worse, or you can breathe deep into the belly and you can slow your exhale down. And then, whoa, this feels really good. Whoa, I can tolerate this. And a bit like the spider phobia, it's like, oh, building strength and grit and emotional resilience. So those sorts of tools, when we become practiced in them, you can then take them to a moment of stress. But moreover, you're building this capacity for handling stress. And as if all of this wasn't compelling enough for cold water therapy, it also boosts your immune system. And it's known to release high levels of dopamine. So it's something like 2.5 to 5 times your regular amount of dopamine is released by going into the cold. And it has a sustained effect. And particularly if you do lovely things like ice baths, it has a really, really prolonged effect.
Right.
Yes. So this is all the stuff that I'm interested in, and for anybody that's listening, what you want to do is you want to try a variety of things. And a bit like the mindful drinking exercise, you just want to pay attention to what happens. And particularly, like, if the first time I heard about cold water therapy, my instant reaction was, hell no, I'm not doing that. I like to be warm. Thank you very much. But just as I was willing to be wrong about alcohol, that little voice, that inner voice, the authentic one, I thought, hang on a minute. Well, if I don't experiment with this, how do I really know?
Right.
So being willing to be wrong and try things out and see how it makes you feel, because you will know really, really quickly what lights you up, what makes you feel good. And then, of course, you want to do more of those things. So the idea is you try lots of things, particularly things that you might have liked when you were a kid. So I got back into gymnastics. Whoa, like, that feels really good. I was scared to death of hurting myself initially, but you you just, I don't know, you expand your comfort zone as well. Like it's just, it feels amazing. There are reasons why as a kid you were interested in painting or gymnastics or whatever the thing was. So trying to tap back into those things now can have a huge benefit. And ultimately what you want to have is a web. You want to be held by a web. So not just hinging your whole self-care routine on a little bit of meditation and a walk on a morning, because what happens if you can't go for a walk that morning? You're stretched for time. What happens if your meditation practice falls off? So if you have a web, back to the spiders again, they've made 2 entries into your podcast. If you think about a spider's web, there's so many threads to it. So if for whatever reason I can't get my morning meditation in, I'm held by other things. So during the day, I will, I don't know, do an ecstatic breathwork practice, or I will go for a walking meditation, or I will have a yoga nidra practice or self-hypnosis. You know, there are so many things, but we can only know what works for us by trying it. And then it's this, you know, repeated action, the consistency of it, but not to the point. It's not about ticking boxes. It's about doing the stuff that makes you feel good. And it's about being flexible with it so that, you know, the web's quite malleable and moves about.
And you won't know if it feels good unless you pay attention as you're doing it. And so many of us have had these practices in our lives that we do because we feel like we need to do them to check the boxes, like you said, but we're not paying attention to how they make us feel. We're not paying attention to whether we even like them. And so again, if you're starting and you're thinking, you're listening to this and you're thinking, I need to start building this web. I love that word for it. I always talk about building a foundation like a cushion. And the more things you put down there, the further, the less distance you have to fall when life hands you like a big bowl of lemons, right? And so it's this idea of building up this base underneath that you can rely on when life gets tough, or this web thing. And doing that, you can start again with all of this. You can start again with the experimenting. You can go back to the things that used to make you feel good. You can do the things that you're doing now and find out whether they really do make you feel good. And you can create this kind of customized set of practices that actually help you to feel good. And you can then do that in conjunction with all of the mindset awareness and shifting that we talk about so much on this podcast and that we started off talking about. So thank you for explaining that. I love that. Ellie's really into the Wim Hof stuff. I'm like, my curiosity is peaking. And as you were talking, I was thinking, is that my inner voice telling me to go get really, really cold? I'm not sure. I'm going to keep listening, maybe. But thank you so much for sharing everything that you've shared today, Ellie. We could talk for hours. I would love to know I would like you to let everybody know where they can find your podcast and then also where they can find you.
So the podcast is called the Present and Sober Podcast. So that's available on all the usual places, Google, Spotify, Apple. And that's myself and my co-host, Sam Goldfinch. And as I say, we do talk about alcohol, but we also talk about a bunch of other stuff. And we don't take anything too seriously, so it's quite a good laugh, usually at my expense, but we have a lot of fun. And we're depending on when this airs, we may have tipped over our year anniversary episode. So it's been going a little while now. It's kind of strange to think back. So yes, come and listen to the podcast. We'd love to have you as a listener. And my handle on social media is Pump Up the Present. So for any 80s kids out there with Pump Up the Jam and Pump Up the Volume, it's like that, but with present at the end. The whole point being about, the thing that we've got is a present moment. So it's about elevating that. So you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and my website is pumpupthepresent.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ellie, for coming on this morning. Again, apologies for my late arrival and the fact that I'm literally wearing my pajamas right now. I'm not going to show anybody, but on the bottom, I'm very business on top, although I am, if you want to see what I look like, completely unfiltered with no makeup, watch this on YouTube, because that's how I look right now. Thank you so much for coming on, Ellie. It's been an absolute delight talking to you. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Oh, thank you so much, Wendy. It's been awesome. Take care.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a certified Naked Mind coach, I help busy women like you find freedom from alcohol. If you're starting to question your relationship with alcohol, you'll want to listen to my free 3-part video series where I address the top 3 myths around why you think you need to drink. Sign up now at www.wendymccallum.com/myths. That's www.wendymccallum.com/myths.